Grow CFO is where finance leaders grow together. Join thousands of like-minded professionals using Grow CFO to access the combined knowledge and experience of the finance leader community. You can join us today, growcfo.net. Hello and welcome to the Grow CFO show. I'm your host, Kevin Appleby, and today I've got one of our Grow CFO members, Maria Ghibu, here. Maria is a fractional CFO, and she's going to tell us a little bit about her journey to date and some of the things that she's developed some expertise in. So, Maria, welcome to the Grow CFO show.
Thank you for having me, Kevin. It's a pleasure to be here.
That is not a British accent, though you're sitting in London.
Yes, the name is also not British.
Tell us about your background.
Right. I'm Romanian, born and raised. Just briefly, I lived in Romania until I was 24. And then I moved to Luxembourg. And then I moved to Geneva. Then I moved to Singapore, then to Paris, and ultimately to London. So I've been everywhere in the last 20 years.
Gosh, that is quite a journey. So there must have been some cultural differences there, moving
Yes.
from Romania.
Well, the first one was the move, and the biggest one is the first one, right? The move from Romania to Luxembourg when, the borders were open. It was interesting because it's so similar, you cannot imagine. Transylvania, we have Sachsen, which is the German ethnics, and they brought all of the culture and the food from Central Europe. So basically, the grandmother of my colleague from Luxembourg would cook the same food that my grandmother cooks. It's fascinating to see that, honestly. So it wasn't a big cultural shock.
What about language?
Language, Luxembourg is a very melting pot. But basically, they have French and German and obviously Luxembourgish, which I don't speak, but most work is done in English as well. And I do speak French and I do speak a bit of German as well. So it was okay. Language-wise, just fine. But I did have a headache for a month when I moved.
Yeah. So now, all of that movement around the globe, what would you say your biggest lessons learned coming out of that?
It's a good one. And I think that's what brought me to INSEAD as well. Coming from Romania, which is pretty much, I had the Romanian experience. Going to Luxembourg, there I was working with colleagues from 30, 40 countries. And that made me realize how much more you get as a group when you work and you have diverse backgrounds. And that pushed me to go to INSEAD as well. So that's the biggest lesson learned for me. When you have very diverse people around the table, the information quotient that you get out of that group is higher. So you can get more out of it. And it's valid in any aspect, but it's beneficial for business especially.
Yeah. So tell me about INSEAD.
INSEAD was when I got through being in Big Four and being a consultant in post-merger integration, I got to a point where I thought, I feel like I need a change. So actually my boss recommended that I go to INSEAD. I was thinking of doing a PhD in finance, by the way. I was looking at Chicago because they have the most Nobel laureates. But my boss said, you don't have the temperament for a PhD because she has a PhD. And she said, it's too political and you like to, you're hands-on, you like to do things and you wouldn't enjoy the PhD style of work. And so she said, go to INSEAD. So I went to INSEAD and it's a transformative experience. It's changed my life and people come out of it. And there's a lot of talk about the network, the power of the network. And it's true, but I think it's about the friendships and the human connections that you make. And also because you realize that in our diversity, we are so similar at the human level, we all have the same things that drive us as humans. And so that's why it's going to be a difficult topic. But when we have all these wars going on in the world, those colleagues, in the end, you had people sitting around the same table that would now be in different sides of that war, for example. And that's powerful. Breaking bread with someone that is very different from you.
Absolutely. And building that network. And one of the things I talk about on our Future CFO program, Module 5, is all about building your network. And one of the things that I stress is knowing the right people that can, A, support you, and B, open doors for you. And I imagine at INSEAD, you've met and maintained relationships.
Yes, and that's correct. I think that before INSEAD, I had a different view of that. So I thought about this network building as transactional or something I have to say that it's not very logical. It's very emotional. You actually make friends and those people support you because they're your friends. It's why I'm talking about the human aspect of it. So it's not really, and it's the same in all the business relationships that I have and have formed before, but especially after INSEAD. It's because I connect to someone on a personal level, and then we get to do business together as well. So it starts with the human connection always. This is important.
Absolutely. And I think that's the way a lot of the best relationships happen. And
Yes.
just yesterday, I ended up picking up the phone to somebody I met in Big Four when we were consulting together in the MOD, Stuart. And we lost touch for a while, but then Stuart had started his own consultancy business as I set up my own company as an independent consultant. Gosh, we contacted back then, and I did a lot of projects for Stuart. Started doing Grow CFO, not so much consulting, and probably Stuart and I hadn't spoken for maybe 3 years. Now, that can happen so easily with relationships, but friendships, a situation where if that network relationship's a friendship, that there should be no problem just picking the phone up and saying, hey, we haven't spoken for a while, let's have a chat.
And so much is out of that, honestly. Like the other day, I had someone in my network contacted me and we went for a coffee, and out of the woodwork comes 3 potential opportunities for me as a CFO, as a fractional CFO, for advisory roles. It's just, as simple as having a lunch with someone I haven't talked to in a while.
Yeah. And if you're a fractional CFO, building those sorts of relationships, that's where the opportunities do come from.
That's true. And actually, I have to say, a lot of the work I did in the projects I did come through my network, come to the people that know me and have worked with me. And people just ring you up and then you recommend you to other people. So it's very important. And it's something as well that maybe we don't think about it very much. It's the second and third degree connections. You don't have to be specifically connected to someone, but you might know someone who knows that person. And the warm introduction goes a long way into establishing some sort of relationship. But it's all about relationships, selling, in sales, in revenue generation, but also in investor relations as well. It's all about who you know and how you get to know those people and what circumstances you get to know them. And in absolutely all business relationships, it's all about that.
Yeah. But post-merger integration, you were talking about doing before INSEAD, now
Yes.
being a fractional CFO, that's quite a change.
It's very different. I agree. I think that honestly, what the work that I did pre-INSEAD feels like 100 years ago. It just feels like in the beginning of my career, and it's very challenging. It's very interesting. We had, going a bit on a tangent, but we had a professor at INSEAD who was teaching managing corporate turnarounds, and his tagline at the course was, "Most turnarounds don't," which is in the same way that most startups fail, which is a reality and statistics. You can't challenge that. Now, in terms of post-merger integration, I think that my personal opinion, philosophy there is that you have all this M&A deal activity and the stuff that happens before the actual merger, that they have the PowerPoints and the analysis, and you're thinking you're going to get these benefits out of it. And because I was someone who went in that was completed and actually got to execute it over, depending on the size of the business, over several years sometimes, that actually is a lot more complicated. And many times you just don't know what you're going to get when you get to that point. And always you're going to have a difference from what you've actually planned or expected when you did the deal. And that's a reality that I've been in so many of these things, and I've never seen something that went as well as or better than expected. Everything gets worse. So because there are so many complexities in real life, we deal with people, we deal with organizations. And so one good example was, I've seen one good example. I'm not going to name the companies, but company A, company B. Company A went and they were very decisive. They decided that the acquiring company would keep their leadership, and then everybody would be reporting into them. And they had a very clear structure, and they had very clear things that they had to do. And they executed really fast. They did things very well. The macro environment was against them, so they kind of were hurt there, but they did it very well. The other company, they had a very interesting approach where they said, we're going to put an executive from here and an executive from there, from the legacy companies. And in the end, they got nothing done. And 2-3 years later, things were still not done. And I was brought in there to fix a few things. And we had people sitting on opposite side of the table, and they were all saying, my company or my system. Like they were still in the mindset of 2 different companies. And so I had to bring that all together. So those are challenges in post-merger integration and in big organizations. Now, when you go to the other side of it, which I'm now on, in London, where I work on, especially on small to growing startups, that's a completely different mentality and reality. So first of all, the complexity, you require a fractional CFO because you don't have a full scope for a full CFO, right? So then the business is much smaller. The complexity is just not there yet. So completely different challenges, and they're not smaller challenges. They're very different, You just have to approach them in a different way. And the reality is that in a post-merger context, when you have massive companies with large teams, you're just a small piece of a whole thing that's happening. Whereas when you are in a smaller company, you just roll up your sleeves and you do everything. Because you're called a fractional CFO doesn't mean anything. You're going to do investor relations. You're going to do introductions. You're going to work on revenue side. You're just going to do everything. What needs to be done will be done. So that's kind of how it works. And this is what I do as well.
Yeah. So you must have learned a lot of new skills. What sort of businesses have you been involved in as fractional CFO?
That's an interesting question. So before I did this fractional CFO gig, I worked in robotics and biotech. So I could speak a bit more about that. So those are the last, I would say, 5-6 years of my career in London are robotics, biotech, and technology. And the companies that I worked with this year are, I would say, wealth tech and direct to consumer, I would say, food company. So very, very different from each other to themselves. Like it can be in any space. Just as a color for another, I was a CEO of an ice cream manufacturing company once. Very fun. You get to sit there and the R&D team comes and they say, try this new product. And you're like, I'm going to get really fat, I can't try all of the ice cream. And that was the point where I was trying to introduce keto ice cream, but it didn't catch. It didn't catch.
Yeah, that sounds very similar story to a guy who used to work for me in PwC. Ended up going off and becoming a finance manager in a gaming business, EA Sports. And they spent half their working day trying out video games down in the basement on these big gaming consoles. Fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it.
There was no way you'd ever talk him out of going to a different company.
The only thing that tempted me more was airlines and airports. I really am fascinated with logistics and shipping companies as well. I love that the side of the business. I do love big complex things. So
robotics and biotech, that must be a big, big part.
Cutting edge.
Collective future.
Yeah, cutting edge. And honestly, I do believe that. I believe in both of these fields. They're just growing and they're going to grow even more. You can see the leaps and bounds in robotics in the last few years. It's fascinating to watch. Now, the issue there in all of these companies is that you have really long R&D cycles. You have a long time to get to product. I won't go into the details, but most of biotech, or if it's a medical device or something like that, it's highly regulated and it's basically regulated in each geography. So it's not like you're okay in the UK and then you're okay worldwide. You have to actually get approval in every space that you are. So that's really, really tough. And that's a huge operational and financial burden that you have before you're actually able to make any sale. And then the adoption side as well is interesting because when it comes to health, there are two camps. Some of the people are jumping on new products and trying new things, whereas others are very conservative. So it's not necessarily true that you're going to capture that market and have high adoption of the product. So funding is difficult because long R&D cycles and then sales depends on adoption, like any product, but it might be difficult and has regulatory burden. So that's biotech. It's not an easy industry to be in. And we've seen a lot of movement in this industry during the pandemic and post-pandemic as well, because investors' appetite are one of the big driving forces in whether these companies are still alive today or not. You have to have that investor funding to actually be able to continue because it will take a while for you to get the revenues to be self-sustaining.
Yeah. So the biggest challenge for the CFO in that sort of business?
Cash, like always.
Cash is key.
I'm obsessed with this book since like 20 years ago when I was in uni. It's called The Goal by Eli Goldratt. I'm not sure if you've heard about it, but it's a great book. And the goal of every business is to make money. So I love seeing revenue. I love seeing profitability, but it's important to see the cash because I may have receivable, but if I don't see the cash and I don't cash the receivables, I'm still not okay. So for me, it's always about the cash. But yeah, that's the biggest concern. And you want to be able to fund operations up to the point where you have, again, sufficiently high recurring revenue and sufficiently high demand, basically. But that comes there is moving fast enough on the operational side to deliver to the client, while at the same time ensuring that you have enough money to survive in the short and medium term as well. You have to do it through a number of things. And because the biotech I was in was a listed company, we were able to access debt financing as well. So that's important. So you don't just do it through investors. You have a bunch of mechanisms and tools at your disposal. But yeah, that's the main concern.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about fundraising environment.
Right. So I think that's
some experience of doing that.
Right. So I think that the freshest one or the most interesting that I think is the robotics one. In robotics, there are a few, right? So if you talk to investors who are Series B investors who come in when the financials are a bit more healthy, when you have recurring revenue, et cetera, you have a more mature business, a Series B, sometimes they laugh in your face and they're saying robotics is not going anywhere. We're seeing like companies that exist for like 4 to 8 years. Basically, what they're saying is robotics is not moving fast enough for some of the VCs. And so you have these periods where you have a lot of excitement from the VCs and then they just cool off because you see 1 or 2 successes and you're thinking it's happening. But then the reality in the field is that robotics is not an easy thing to solve because there are what we call hard problems, things that have not yet been. So it's an R&D stage, companies together. So it's not like robotics is a field where it's not like academia does research. The companies themselves do a lot of R&D to actually solve a lot of the hard problems. This is where the industry is at the moment. It's not a very mature industry, which means that if you're doing a play and you actually haven't solved those hard problems and you're running out of money before you do, you're just going to lose out. You can't do it. And that's why a lot of the robotics companies fail. So the investors are circumspect. They are hesitant. And there are not that many that understand robotics as well. And many of them, they would come and talk to you and they would say, we love your profile, we love your company, we love your energy, but we don't understand anything about robotics. So we need to have X, Y, Z other investors who we know are specialists in robotics and they know what they're doing and they have people inside who are assessing these businesses and we're just going to co-invest. So that's that hurdle. You have to identify the right investors there who are actually knowledgeable because those people are able to assess whether your product makes sense and if it has a future, basically. Mm-hmm. So these are the big challenges. For me, there is another one, which is an interesting one. So robotics, you have to imagine robotics it has a physical component, the hardware part. It has the software part, and this has the, what I call it AI/R&D part. It's a combination of things. And every time an investor hears the word physical goods or CapEx, they're like, so much money. And it's true. It's something that requires more upfront investment and probably longer time to develop than if it were a simple app or a software play. It's just a more complex product, if you will.
Yeah, completely get that. So a very challenging field, both in managing cash flow, the runway.
Absolutely.
Managing the investors. So, and you've got 2 elements to that, I guess. That's one is getting the investors in the first place. And 2 is keeping them happy over a prolonged time frame before the money starts coming in.
I'm glad that you said that because my personal experience is that investors raise funds. So they have whatever funds that they raise that afterwards they deploy and then they want to see returns at some point. We're going to call this a limited time in which they want to see the returns. Maybe they have between 5 and 7 years, depending on the fund. But the idea is that once they deploy, you kind of have to start showing good KPIs right away. So first of all, you have to be smart enough to define relevant KPIs from the beginning. And then you have to show traction. I would say, by the way, and this is just a pet peeve and a tangent, many startups do board meetings every month, which drives me crazy. A lot of work on the exec team, a lot of work on the invite. Nobody wants but people do that. It's something that they do. You could do it every 3 months, arguably, but I would say that every 6 months, you have to show significant progress. And if you're not showing it after 12 months, you might as well be dead, basically. Because what investors have, they have this, I'm not going to say groupthink, but they do tend to flock to the same deals. They want, because basically if a deal or a startup is considered hot, everybody wants to invest there. And then it's hard to get on the cap table. And the startups that are ignored by everybody. It's how it works. So that's the reality of the investing world. And then what happens is, you have to maintain that excitement and that interest all the time. So what we've done, and I've seen it a lot and it's very successful, is you have a distribution list where you tell them all the time what you've achievements. You don't do it every week, but maybe every month or every 3 months, you have this news that goes out that keeps the momentum and the excitement. And you put those KPIs out there and you're saying, oh, we have a few more adopters or we've signed a few new clients. These are things that they care about and they have to see that every 3 months, they have to see that progress. Because otherwise you lose them. They lose the interest. And when it goes cold, the way investors think is they have the middle of the ground, they have the winners and they have the losers. It's really bad to be in the middle because you don't really care. You want to be on the hot seat. You want to be the guys that are super successful, moving really fast. And then you always have.
And because of that prolonged development period, you are going to be in the middle.
It's hard.
Yes. They're only going to recognize you as a winner when you've actually sold stuff and made a profit.
That is correct. That is correct. But also, there are a few ways to circumvent that. So I'll give you an example. I'm not sure you've probably heard of software as a service, SaaS, but there is also something that we call robotics as a service, RAAS. And so I was in an agri-tech firm. So you build these robots that go to large greenhouses to pick, for example, tomatoes, right? So these machines, they are big and they're expensive. And so nobody wants to pay for them because they don't know if they work. It's a pretty novel, innovative product. So what you do is you say, you're going to let me put my robot in your warehouse and it's going to start working. And so you're going to pay me per each kilogram that I harvest. So you kind of replace the human in a way. And so you get some revenue in. This is like hustling and trying to show that you can make some money. And you show the investors that you have traction, that you have interest from the customer, that you are deployed at X customer size, that you have X robots running, and then you have X number of kilograms of tomatoes harvested. And you show those metrics. Even if you haven't sold a robot, you can show some traction. And then you're saying, what I can do, because I'm seeing this real time, so there is media, photographs, and video, I can actually use AI to identify diseases or pests for the crops, which can be very detrimental for the producers. So they're very interested to know when that pops up. And so you can have that early warning system and management of the health of the production. And that can actually perhaps give you a bit more money. So it's hard, and your product may not be at 100% and you're still debugging and you're still working on it and product improvement and doing another iteration. But at the same time, you can show that there is progress. There are ways in which you can show. That's why I said you have to be smart about choosing KPIs that keep the momentum going and keep the interest for both your customer and your investor and the team. Team gets excited,
I guess the majority of those KPIs will not have a pound or a dollar sign in front of them.
Some will have it. We had it. It was low, but we had it.
Yeah. So a great background in robotics, in fundraising, in cash management, coupled with this merger and acquisition integration after the deal. So that's quite a bundle of skills, Maria. Where's that going to take you next?
That's a good question. So if I have to design my own role, I would say that next year I see myself in a high growth startup that is either pre or post Series B, which is pretty big, pretty complex. And I get to wear the hat of finance and operations because I did both. And I have to say, for me, they're pretty connected. I think that you can't be very successful as a CFO if you don't have a really great handle on operations. And in operations, don't happen in a vacuum. In order to be great at delivery, you have to have a good handle on the finance side as well. And that's why for me, in my brain, I don't really distinguish these two. And that's why I want to be the operations CFO or the finance CEO,
Yeah.
Kind of like that.
And I totally get that. It's about understanding the operational model of the business inside out.
Yep. Because otherwise you can't leverage the right points to get it successful financially, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And I think if you're managing the finances just from a profit and loss point of view, from all the titles that you get on your profit and loss account, that's wrong. You're looking at an accounting model of the business.
That's the issue. And I think that I had that mentality maybe 15 years ago, where when I was looking at the CFO, I thought it was a strictly numbers person, And for me, accounting is pretty much backward looking. But when we're talking about finance or strategic finance, we're forward looking because the past can only inform up to a certain extent and it only gives us the constraints and certain opportunities. But if we want to actually move forward and drive the business, then we have to basically look forward, which is where you come in with the podcast, right? You have that forward looking lens and a strategic CFO is a completely different animal than a pure accountant person that looks at what happened in the past and what the numbers say about the past. It's just not that meaningful, basically.
Yeah. That sounds like an exciting place to be. So that certainly doesn't sound fractional. So that's a bit of a...
No, yes. So it's just accidental that I put fractional because I was working again through the network and through connections. I was working with two owner CEOs who needed help, but none of them had the business big enough or complex enough to have a full scope CFO. So it just happened accidentally that this year I worked on two projects at the same time. But
you're the accidental.
Exactly. I'm the accident. Exactly. It just happened. But going forward, I'm certainly looking for a full scope CFO position with a strong COO, strong operations side in a larger high growth tech startup in London. Yeah.
Yeah. So what other experience do you have? Maria?
Yeah, so I was having a conversation about the COO role with a headhunter like 2-3 years ago. And they put my name forward. Then they came back and they apologized because apparently that position had been filled internally. You know how it happens sometimes. They just shop around. But I had a really good relationship with the person. And a couple of weeks later, he came back and he said, I have a great opportunity and as a board member. And I went back to him and I said, look, I am pretty much an executive person because I'm hands-on and I'm not really looking for board opportunities because I believe that being on a board comes with a lot of responsibility. You are responsible for a lot of things. And I was thinking there's a liability involved in that. And do I want that? Do I want that risk? And in the end, you want to be careful also who you associate yourself with in terms of being on a board, even if you're a non-executive director. It's just important for you. In the end, it's your image and your reputation, and you have to carefully select those companies. So I was approached by more than 20 companies that wanted me to be on board. And I finally said yes to this person because it's the Chartered Institute of Internal Auditors. And these people, I kid you not, they write the book on great governance. And the people around the table, they make the rules. They are really, really great people. I have learned so much from them. And because as an exec, I was in several boards before. And I can tell you, there are so many bad practices that I've seen firsthand that I'm not keen on, but it happens a lot. You know, it just happens. Good and great governance is not a given. It's actually something that you have to fight for every day. And it's not easy to fight for that. And there are many, many things that the board does, like, for example, changing an executive like a CEO. And these are big decisions that you have to think long and hard about them and weigh a lot of things. And I've done that. We've done that. And honestly, it's very satisfying to be able to influence at that level. But I have to say that I have the right group around the table. And I've seen growth in myself and in the fellow board members around the table as well over the last mandate, basically over the last 3 years.
And it's certainly one of those things that I'd say to any up and coming CFO, think about whether taking on a board role as a non-exec somewhere else is going to be something for you. And I think you can learn so much from sitting in a different organization and find out different ways that things happen in different cultures.
Absolutely.
You can learn a lot that way. Yeah. But Maria, talking to you, one thing that actually stands out from the conversation is relationships. It seems as though having strong friendships, strong relationships have driven your career. You're talking about those relationships having pointed you to INSEAD. You're talking about those relationships having pointed you into 2 different fractional CFO roles accidentally.
Yes.
You've had relationships having pointed you into a board appointment.
Yes, absolutely.
So that to me is that big, big takeaway from this conversation. Form strong relationships and go out of your way to keep those relationships alive and relevant.
And I have a few tips for that if you want. I'm someone who loves to learn. When I meet someone, for me, it's fascinating to understand their journey, what they did. And because people have so many fun and interesting things that they've done if you actually take the time to talk to them and listen. And sometimes it's just be curious, ask people about their experience, get to know them, and then things will pop up. And it won't be something that you can help them with or they can help you with right away. But like you said, 3 years down the line, you form a wonderful business relationship after not speaking to a person, right? Steward. So in the end, it's just that kind of being open, being curious, being a good listener and trying to learn and know people.
Yeah. People love talking about themselves. Don't start forming that relationship with the intention just of pitching you to the other person.
Yep.
Look at that in terms of forming a relationship, getting to know them, helping each other.
Absolutely.
It's a fantastic lesson. Maria Ghibu, thank you very much for being this week's guest on the Global CFO Show.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It was a pleasure. Like always, we always have these interesting conversations and it's just lovely to speak with you.
Brilliant. Thank you.